You know, people often say that wealth reveals the true nature of those around you. I never really believed that, until the day I realized my children were circling me like vultures, waiting for me to take my last breath. I had always thought I raised them well. Discipline, education, comfort, everything a parent is supposed to provide. Yet, sitting in my living room one quiet afternoon, I began to understand that I had raised something else, greed. That day, I remember, the air was thick with silence. I had just poured myself a glass of red wine and leaned back on my leather chair, the afternoon sun spilling through the tall windows, warming the gold-trimmed drapes. Bonney, my Labrador, lay at my feet, snoring softly. Everything was calm, ordinary. Or so I thought. Then I heard them. At first, I brushed it off as idle chatter, my children's muffled voices from the corridor outside my study. But something in their tone made me pause. It wasn't laughter or nostalgia. It was hushed, sharp, calculating. I leaned closer, straining my ears. Once he's gone, we'll sell the cars first. No point letting them rot. The estate can go too, the land alone will bring millions. I froze. My eldest son's voice, smooth as ever, but dripping with a kind of cold ambition I hadn't heard before. My daughter chimed in, almost excitedly, we can split it down the middle, or, maybe keep the penthouse. I always loved that view. Their words sliced through me sharper than any blade. They weren't just imagining life without me. They were planning it. Planning my absence as if it were a business deal, rehearsing who would take what. I sat perfectly still, my knuckles tightening around the glass. A father should never have to hear his own children plotting the sale of his life's work, the empire he built with sweat, nights of hunger, and years of sacrifice. Yet there I was, listening to them carve up my legacy like a butcher with a carcass. And the worst part? Not one of them mentioned me. Not a single word of grief, no hesitation, no guilt. Just numbers, shares, percentages. I felt Bonney stir beside me, sensing my unease. He lifted his head, his eyes meeting mine, those loyal brown eyes that never once betrayed me. I bent down, scratching behind his ear, more for my comfort than his. Don't worry, boy, I whispered. We'll handle this. But inside, my chest burned with a storm of emotions, anger, sorrow, disbelief. Was this what I had given my life for? To raise heirs who valued inheritance more than blood. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying their words over and over again. The way they laughed, the way they mapped out their future, a future where I was already buried. I thought about confronting them, demanding an explanation. But I knew how that would go. They'd deny it, of course. They'd paint me as paranoid, old, losing my mind. No. That would be giving them control. Instead, as the clock ticked past midnight, a colder, sharper idea took root in my mind. If they were already imagining a life without me, then perhaps I should imagine a life, and an afterlife, without them. I got up, went to the study, and poured myself another drink. The shadows stretched long across the floor, the house eerily silent except for Bonney's soft breathing. And in that silence, I made a promise to myself. They would not win. I didn't know exactly how yet, but I would make sure of one thing: when the time came, the ones who had waited so eagerly for my death would find nothing but emptiness in their greedy hands. The next morning, I tested them. A casual breakfast, nothing unusual. I spoke about the future, hinted at the will, dropped little breadcrumbs. Their eyes flickered, too quickly, too brightly, whenever I mentioned money, assets, property. And then I knew. My suspicions weren't paranoia. They were fact. I smiled at them, calm and pleasant, the way a man smiles at wolves before pulling the trigger. All the while, a plan was taking shape in my mind, quiet, deliberate, unshakable. You see, betrayal has a way of sharpening the senses. Every look, every word, every gesture from them felt heavier, clearer. And each one only fueled my resolve. As the day wore on, I found myself oddly calm. even amused. They thought they were clever, that their whispers in dark hallways were hidden from me. But they underestimated me, just as they underestimated the bond between me and Bonney. Because while they were busy planning my death, I was planning something far more exquisite, their downfall. And so, dear listener, that was the moment the game began. A game of patience, of silence, of watching. They didn't know it yet, but they had already lost. They say the cruelest betrayals come not from enemies, but from those you call family. By the time I realized my children were planning their victory feast before I was even in the grave, the decision was already made in my heart. But it wasn't enough to be angry. Anger burns hot and fast, it's a fire that consumes itself. What I needed was something colder, sharper, something that would cut deeper than any argument or confrontation. I needed revenge. The kind that would linger long after I was gone. So, a week after I overheard their little conspiracy, I found myself in the polished office of my lawyer, Mr. Hammond. A thin man with glasses perched on his nose, Hammond had handled my affairs for decades. He was used to my whims, new investments, property transfers, the occasional tax maneuver. But when I told him what I wanted this time, his pen actually froze mid-signature. "You want to leave, everything, to your dog?" His voice cracked like a boy in puberty. "Yes," I said, without hesitation. Bonney sat at my feet, tail wagging, oblivious to the fact that he had just been promoted to heir of a fortune worth millions. Hammond blinked at me, then removed his glasses, cleaning them as if that would change what he'd heard. "You do understand the consequences, don't you? Your children." "My children," I interrupted, "are nothing more than vultures. They've made their intentions very clear. If loyalty must be rewarded, then it goes to the one creature who has never betrayed me." He opened his mouth to argue, then stopped. He must have seen the iron in my expression, the way my jaw tightened as I spoke. Hammond knew me well enough to realize I wasn't joking. "Very well," he said finally, with the weariness of a man signing a deal with the devil. "We can establish a trust in Bonney's name, appoint a caretaker, manage the estate legally. The law allows it, though," he hesitated. "It will not sit well with your family." A bitter smile tugged at my lips. "That's the point." As the papers were drawn up, I watched Hammond's pen scratch across the pages, each stroke sealing my children's fate. Bonney, meanwhile, had stretched himself lazily across the rug, snoring again. If only he knew that in that moment, he was becoming wealthier than most humans could ever dream. When the final document was placed before me, I signed without hesitation. My hand didn't tremble, not even for a second. With each letter of my name, I carved out the future I wanted, a future where greed would find nothing but emptiness, where betrayal would be punished with silence, and where loyalty, simple, pure loyalty, would be crowned. I left Hammond's office that day feeling lighter than I had in months. There's a peculiar kind of freedom in knowing you've outplayed your enemies before they even realize the game has begun. That evening, as I sat once more on my sofa, the match flickering across the television, Bonney curled beside me, I couldn't help but laugh quietly to myself. My children, no doubt, were still whispering their plans, blind to the fact that the empire they craved now belonged to a Labrador with muddy paws and a fondness for chewing slippers. But of course, secrets have a way of leaking. And I knew, inevitably, they would discover what I had done. And when they did, oh, how the storm would come. In the days that followed, I kept my composure, acting as though nothing had changed. I entertained them at dinners, listened to their empty chatter, pretended not to notice the hunger in their eyes when they looked at my watch, my car, my estate. They thought time was on their side. They had no idea it was slipping away. One evening, my eldest son casually brought up the subject of inheritance, cloaking his greed in feigned concern. "Father," he said, "have you ever thought about simplifying your estate? You know, to make things easier for us, when the time comes?" I took a slow sip of my wine, savoring the moment before replying. "I've thought about it," I said evenly. "In fact, I've already made the necessary arrangements." The look that flickered across his face, surprise, curiosity, a flicker of unease, was delicious. He pressed no further, but I could see the questions burning behind his eyes. And so, the trap was set. They didn't know it yet, but every move they made from here on out would only tighten the noose around their necks. The will was signed, sealed, and untouchable. Their greed had awakened a force they couldn't control, me. And Bonney, loyal Bonney, snored peacefully through it all, blissfully unaware that he now held the keys to their ruin. So, dear listener, understand this: betrayal breeds vengeance, and vengeance, when crafted carefully, is a masterpiece. The brush was in my hand, the canvas before me. All that remained was to paint the downfall of my children, stroke by stroke. And when they finally discovered the truth, it would be far too late to stop me. I always knew the day would come when the secret would slip through the cracks. Nothing that dangerous stays hidden forever. The ink on Bonney's inheritance was barely dry before whispers began swirling through the halls of my home, suspicion curdling in the air like sour milk. It happened on a Tuesday. Funny how ordinary days often carry the heaviest storms. I was in my living room, seated in my usual spot, a soft leather sofa that had molded itself to my frame over the years. The television glowed with the sight of my favorite football club taking the field. The smell of fresh coffee filled the room. Bonney lay stretched across the rug, gnawing at a rubber bone, his tail wagging gently every time the commentator's voice rose in excitement. That was when the door burst open. My eldest son stormed in first, his face flushed with rage. Behind him came his sister, her expression sharp, lips pressed so tightly they were nearly bloodless. They didn't bother with pleasantries. "You changed the will," my son spat. I didn't even flinch. My eyes stayed fixed on the television as the referee blew the starting whistle. The roar of the crowd filled the room, drowning out the thunder in his voice. "Yes," I said simply, sipping my coffee. "To a dog?" My daughter's voice cracked, shrill with disbelief. "Do you expect us to accept this? That everything, the estate, the cars, the company, goes to Bonney?" At the mention of his name, Bonney perked up, tail thumping against the rug. I chuckled softly. He seems pleased with the arrangement. That pushed them over the edge. My son's hand slammed against the coffee table, rattling the glass vase that sat atop it. "This is insane. You've lost your mind, father. Do you have any idea how this makes us look? How it makes you look?" Finally, I turned my gaze toward them, calm, deliberate. My voice was low, but it carried the weight of stone. "It makes me look like a man who rewards loyalty. And it makes you look like what you are, vultures circling the living." The silence that followed was thick, suffocating. My daughter's lips trembled with rage, but no words came. My son clenched his fists, veins rising on his temples. "You can't do this," he growled. "We won't let you." I leaned back, utterly relaxed, as the stadium erupted on screen with the first goal of the match. "You can't stop it," I said. "The papers are signed. The law recognizes Bonney as my heir. And when I'm gone, every last coin, every last stone of this house, will belong to him." The calmness in my tone was deliberate, calculated. It infuriated them more than shouting ever could. My daughter finally found her voice, but it shook as she spoke. "Do you hate us that much?" I shook my head slowly. "No. Hate requires too much energy. I simply see you for what you are now. And I prefer the company of my dog." Her eyes glistened with something between fury and shame. For a moment, I wondered if she'd cry, but she bit it back, her jaw tightening until it looked painful. My son, however, wasn't finished. He leaned closer, his face inches from mine, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You're making a mistake. Change it back. Or—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. The threat lingered in the air, heavy, poisonous. I looked at him for a long moment, then smiled faintly. "Or what?" He flinched at the calmness in my tone. He expected fear, panic, maybe even anger. But I gave him none of that. Instead, I turned back to the television, just in time to see my team score again. The crowd roared, and I let the sound wash over me like a shield. "Sit down," I said quietly, not looking at them. "The game is on." They didn't sit. They stood there, seething, like predators denied their prey. Finally, my daughter grabbed her brother's arm and pulled him toward the door. But as she left, she turned back, her voice trembling with venom. "You'll regret this." The door slammed, rattling the frame. Silence fell again, broken only by the jubilant voices of the commentators and Bonney's happy panting. I leaned back, closing my eyes for a moment. The storm had arrived, and it was only the beginning. They wouldn't stop now. I had seen it in their faces: desperation, rage, greed. They would come harder, faster, more recklessly. And that was exactly what I wanted. Because you see, dear listener, anger makes people sloppy. It strips away their masks, exposes their true selves. And as they revealed themselves, I would be ready, watching, recording every move. They thought they were threatening me into submission. But all they were really doing was walking into the trap I had laid. I opened my eyes, glanced at Bonney, and smiled. "Good boy," I whispered. The match ended with my team victorious. But the real game, the one I had set in motion, was only beginning. I knew from the moment they stormed out of my living room that night, slamming the door behind them, that it wouldn't end there. Children like mine don't accept defeat. Greed doesn't retreat quietly, it festers, it schemes, it grows claws. And sure enough, the days that followed grew darker. At first, it was small things. My son returning uninvited, lingering too long in my office, asking questions about financial accounts he had no business knowing. My daughter dropping subtle hints about caregivers and safety, as if she were already rehearsing a case to prove I was senile. I smiled through it all. I let them think they were clever, that they were pulling the strings. What they didn't know was that every word, every threat, every whisper was already being captured. You see, long before I changed my will, I installed cameras in this house. Not just for security, but for insurance. Discreet, invisible, tucked into corners where no eye ever strayed. Every recording was uploaded directly to a private drive beyond their reach. So when my son leaned close and hissed that I was losing my mind, the world heard it. When my daughter suggested a doctor's note could solve everything, the world heard that too. They thought they were planting seeds. They didn't realize they were digging graves. But greed has a way of speeding up its own downfall. By the third week, they were no longer whispering. They came to me one night, both of them together, masks stripped away. It was raining outside, a relentless storm hammering against the windows, lightning tearing open the night sky. Bonney growled the moment they stepped in, sensing the poison in their hearts. My son was the first to speak, his voice steady but his eyes wild. "We've had enough of this. You're going to the lawyer tomorrow. You're changing the will back. And if I don't?" I asked, leaning back on the sofa, calm as ever. His jaw tightened. "Then you won't make it to tomorrow." The words hung in the air like smoke, heavy and suffocating. My daughter's silence confirmed it, she wasn't going to stop him this time. Most men might have felt fear in that moment. But fear is a weakness, and I'd already burned mine away weeks ago. Instead, I felt something else: satisfaction. I rose slowly, walked past them to the cabinet, and poured myself a drink. The ice clinked in the glass, sharp against the silence. I took a slow sip, savoring the way their eyes followed me, waiting for me to break. "You know," I said softly, "I wondered how long it would take before you said it out loud." They exchanged a glance, startled by my calm. My son opened his mouth, but I raised a hand to silence him. "You think I'm weak? That age has dulled me. That I sit here in my chair, helpless, while you sharpen your knives in the dark. But you're wrong." I set the glass down with deliberate care. "I've been watching you. Recording you. Preparing for this very moment." Their faces shifted, confusion, then shock, then fear. Every word you've said, every threat you've made, is stored. Safe. Secure. And if anything happens to me, anything at all, those recordings go straight to the authorities. Straight to the press. I stepped closer, lowering my voice to a whisper. So go ahead. Try it. See how the world looks at you when they hear how you plotted against your own father. Lightning split the sky, illuminating their pale faces. For the first time, I saw hesitation in my son's eyes, cracks in his fury. My daughter swallowed hard, her lips trembling. You wouldn't, she stammered. I smiled faintly. Wouldn't I? The files are already beyond your reach. Kill me, and you inherit nothing but your own disgrace. Leave me alive, and you inherit nothing but your resentment. Either way, you lose. The room was silent except for the storm outside. Bonney, ever loyal, pressed against my leg, his growl vibrating through the floor. Finally, my son cursed under his breath, fists clenching. He turned, storming toward the door, dragging his sister with him. The slam of wood against the frame echoed through the house like a gunshot. And then, silence. I stood there for a moment, breathing slowly, the adrenaline coursing through me like fire. Then I laughed, quietly at first, then louder, until the sound filled the room. Because in that moment, I knew the truth. The game was mine. They had revealed their hand too soon. They had shown the depth of their greed, the sharpness of their knives, and in doing so, they had handed me victory. They thought they were hunters. But they were prey, stumbling deeper into the trap with every step. I returned to my sofa, Bonney curling against me, and turned the television back on. The match was over, but I hardly noticed. My mind was already moving to the final step, the masterpiece of this revenge. And dear listener, trust me when I say, the final act would be unforgettable. Revenge, if you ask me, isn't about rage or blood. It's about timing. It's about patience. It's about letting your enemies walk so deep into the swamp of their own greed that by the time they realize they're drowning, there's no one left to pull them out. And oh, how beautifully my children drowned. After that stormy night, after their threats and their fury, I barely spoke to them. I didn't need to. They were unraveling all on their own. Every visit grew shorter, every phone call sharper. They stopped pretending to care, stopped hiding their intentions. Greed had stripped them bare. I knew what was coming. One morning, Hammond, my lawyer, called. His tone was clipped, cautious. Your children have filed a petition, he said. They're claiming you're unfit to manage your estate. They want the court to intervene. I almost laughed. So this was their grand strategy? To paint me as a senile old man, incapable of making my own decisions? Oh, let them try, I told him. And try they did. They came armed with witnesses, with papers, with lies polished to a gleam. In court, they stood tall, dripping with false concern. My daughter's voice trembled just so, perfectly rehearsed, as she spoke of her poor father, confused and fragile. My son nodded gravely, playing the dutiful air forced to protect the family legacy. They thought the performance was flawless. They thought the judge would see me as an old fool. But then, it was my turn. My lawyer pressed play, and the courtroom filled with voices. Their voices. Clear, undeniable, recorded in my very home. Once he's gone, we'll sell the cars first. We can split it down the middle. You're going to the lawyer tomorrow. You're changing the will back. Or you won't make it to tomorrow. The words spilled out like poison, echoing against the walls, erasing every lie they had just told. Their faces drained of color, their masks shattering before the world. The judge leaned forward, eyes narrowing, as the recordings played on, every threat, every whisper, every proof of their greed. When it was over, the silence was heavier than any gavel. My lawyer cleared his throat. Your Honor, he said, calm and steady, does this sound like the concern of loving children? Or the conspiracy of heirs hungry for a fortune? The ruling was swift. The petition was denied, their credibility torn to shreds. But more than that, the judge ordered an investigation into their behavior. Attempted coercion. Threats. Possible criminal charges. I didn't need to say a word. I just sat there, watching as the walls closed in around them, watching the panic bloom in their eyes. For once, they had no clever answers, no polished lies. Just silence. And as I walked out of that courtroom, Bonney trotting proudly at my side, I felt lighter than I had in years. From that day forward, they stopped visiting. Stopped calling. Stopped pretending. They knew they had lost. And worse, they knew I had beaten them at their own game. But I wasn't finished. Oh no. The will remained, ironclad, untouchable. Bonney was still my sole heir, his name printed boldly on every page. And I made sure it stayed that way. Because one day, and I say this without fear, one day, when I leave this world, they will gather again. They'll sit in Hammond's office, waiting for the inheritance they always dreamed of. And Hammond will clear his throat, adjust his glasses, and tell them the truth. That every house, every car, every penny, belongs to Bonney. I picture their faces sometimes. The disbelief, the outrage, the despair. I picture my daughter's trembling lips, my son's clenched fists. And then I picture Bonney, tail wagging, ears flopping, completely unaware that he has reduced them to nothing. It makes me laugh every time. You see, dear listener, this was never about money. It was about justice. About showing them that love cannot be bought, that loyalty cannot be faked, and that betrayal always has a price. And I paid it in full. So now, I sit in my living room, the match on the television, Bonney curled at my feet. The world outside may rage with greed and envy, but in here, there is peace. Because I know that when the final whistle blows on my life, it won't be my children who win. It will be Bonney. The only one who ever deserved it. And that, my friends, is the sweetest revenge. And that, dear listener, this how I got my revenge. Now, tell me, if you were in my place, would you have done the same? Or would you have forgiven them? Drop your thoughts in the comments, I'll be reading them all. If you enjoyed this tale of betrayal and vengeance, make sure to hit that like button, it tells me you want more stories like this. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications, because trust me, I've got plenty more stories to share. And hey, if you know someone who loves a good twist of revenge, go ahead and share this video with them. Who knows? Maybe they'll learn something from Bonney's inheritance too. Until next time, stay sharp. Stay loyal. And never underestimate a man with a plan.